Hi 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Brad Loomis and Alberto Nunez as we chat about competition coaching for bodybuilding and powerlifting. So this conversation begins with how we strategically handle our bodybuilders from the time we pick a show to the time we end a season. It's not about peak week protocols or what foods to eat in certain amounts. We've kind of already done that, but more about what we do in terms of calling the shots on game day, if you will, kind of. Some questions that we answer within this bodybuilding portion of the podcast might be something like, how do we pick shows for athletes when we can? How do we manipulate the physique in accordance with certain judging criteria? What planning protocols do we feel like people miss? What could a coach actually even do for an athlete backstage? How do we make ourselves useful in terms of physical and emotional management of our athletes? And once we switch over to this discussion being more about powerlifting, we dive into some questions that are more specific to a performance athlete. So how do we select attempts before meet day, and what would cause us to change our minds about those? Are there times when the total matters more than a certain weight lifted and vice versa, and how do we dictate that? What is our role on the platform, and how do we sort of become the soccer mom for all of our athletes at big meets? What does this entire planning how does this entire planning process change based on athletes' experience level and whether or not they've competed before? So we answer all those questions and a whole bunch more throughout this episode, and we hope it's a valuable resource for you guys. If you have any feedback or comments on this specific episode, you can leave them for us at 3dmusclejourney.com under podcast 38. And if you love all the episodes, leaving us an honest review on iTunes would be super duper nice of you. We would really appreciate that. So here it is, guys. Without further ado, competition day coaching with Alberto Nunez and Brad Loomis. Game day. That's what we're talking about.
It's here.
Game day. Okay, so things that we can do, manipulate, affect at all as coaches, right? Like 24 hours, maybe 48 before the show / meet.
So this has nothing to do with the Super Bowl. This is what I thought is Super Bowl.
You're like, I thought I was here.
And kind of like what they were doing 2 weeks ago to get ready for the Super Bowl this weekend. You know, how are they strategizing 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, game day strategies, comp strategies. So not peak week, like what to eat and shit like that, but all the other things that we can manipulate and, like Brad says, strategize.
Yeah, strategy.
I think we'll start with bodybuilding.
Okay.
And I think something that's really, really important, and this was really like handy back when I did live in California, and like we knew all the shows like the back of our hands. Yeah. Like I would pick to a certain extent what shows some of my athletes would do.
Yeah.
So a good example of that was, Johnny's show. Like it's a great first timers environment.
Yeah.
And, most athletes that, do that show, they continue to do it because it's not very cutthroaty. The environment backstage is great. The crowd is wonderful.
It's early in the year.
Yeah. So I think to a certain extent, we can start with that, like where you plug in your athlete. And sure, this is like something you probably pick weeks in advance. However, it is important, like where you like. I've had it happen before where our first show had to be like some huge NPC show, and you're kind of crossing your fingers. You're like, oh man, I hope like they have a good time and they don't feel like total cattle.
Yeah.
So I think that is important. Is like where you place your athlete. Where is the game going to be played? That's very important.
Yeah, good call there. I remember too when I first moved there. You telling me all that stuff, you're like, we want to open with this one, and then doing my shows too close together the second time, and we had to back up my third one. Remember that was another thing too, because I had some, we're going to go TMI, right? I had some digestive problems the second show, and we kept shoving carbies and coffees in me. By the end of like 2 days later on a little human, I was like 4 or 5 pounds up. And I was supposed to compete 2 weeks later, and I wasn't ready again yet. Yeah, so we ended up waiting like 6 weeks.
So, yeah, that stuff's really important because you want a good environment to let the athlete comfortably perform.
Yeah. And what's hard is you don't know that as a first timer. Like I was by myself and I was in my first show was an NPC show and I was a class of 14 figure girls and I was like, dude, I was like, I don't know where I'm going. I was backstage by myself. I didn't have a coach. Thankfully I'll talk to brick walls and I was like asking everyone with a clipboard. I'm like, what do I do? Where am I supposed to go? They're like, go get tanned. Go. You can't go on like that. I'm like, oh, okay. So I walk over there like.
Well, and let's face it. I mean, how often do we get the chance to do that? How often do we really get to? That's one of the things I really miss about my coaching of my football players is that strategizing. Okay, this team they cover the B gap really good, so let's run our 18 around because that's how we're going to beat these guys. We don't get to do that very often. So
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. Just strategizing on how we're going to beat this team. What's our game plan going to be? I mean, how often do we get to do that, in this sport? Not very often. But boy, when we do, it sure is gratifying. And it's very satisfying when it actually comes together, because you can strategize all you want to. Sometimes it doesn't come together,
Yeah, but that's
like Bert said, you do a little bit of research on your show. And like with us, because we knew so many of the shows back here, we kind of would start to get to know, okay, this show they're looking for conditioning, and this show they're looking for this. So, let's face it, this is supposed to be a competitive sport, and while we do want to have a good time backstage, and we do want to have a good environment, we can kind of research shows a little bit, we can kind of tailor, our look for what we think will get us the best placing, and so a tiny bit of that competitiveness can come out of us.
Yeah, I guess that is one of those advantages of having a coach that you kind of don't think about was that, like, I didn't know when I started working with Bert that he would know which shows would probably be best for me, being my first time in the state and not being on stage in a while and all that stuff. And I guess that's hard, right? When I have like an athlete in Germany, he's like, I'm going to do this show. I'm like, whatever, cool. Like, because I don't know. Yeah. I can't help him there, but if I have someone in NorCal, it's a lot easier, or Texas or whatever. So that's a good point.
Exactly. It is rare. It is super rare because you're right. 90% of the time we're like, okay, cool. Let's just get shredded,
Yeah.
The times that we do get to say, okay, if we're doing 2 shows, this one, I remember vividly standing in my gym way back in 2011. Andrea, I know how you like story time.
I do like story time.
Yeah. We were standing, Eric and Jeff and I were standing in the gym. Eric had just won his pro card. It was one of those rare years where we were all competing. So we're all shredded. And Jeff's getting, ready for an NPC show. And I remember, I didn't even know what this meant at the time. It was like, 3 years later, it occurred to me, what he meant by this. But he was saying basically he was getting ready for an NPC show, and he says basically, I could get leaner. I could definitely get more shredded. He says, but I'm not going to. I don't have to. I can lean on my symmetry and place very well and hold my own, And of course, at the time, I do my typical thing. Oh.
Yeah, totally, guys. I agree.
But then 3 years later, it occurred to me what he was talking about there. It's like, yeah, if we're thinking, a placing here, let's face it. In the NPC, the more shredded you are, the more small you are, and sometimes the worse you place. And so he was kind of talking strategy, there as well. We don't get to do that very often.
Yeah, and that brings us to another point you had mentioned earlier before we started recording was there's a couple of guys on my roster this year that were doing male physique that probably could have, if they were doing bodybuilding, I would have taken them down another 5 to 8 pounds, but they weren't so developed. And it was just upper body, and they needed to keep their symmetry and not get any smaller. So we kept a little bit of weight on them. And I'm sure I'll do that all the time as well. But
yeah. And sometimes you just don't want to take a new athlete. Like, you don't want to put them through the ringer just yet.
Or a young one. Yeah, a little young.
Yeah. But yeah, so we picked our show. It's the right show for us, or it's all we have. Now, I think when I think of like game day, like show day, well, first of all, I think of like the morning before, the morning Friday, say shows on Saturday. like shaving. Like it's so weird because I'm like I'm about to get ready for like war, right? And then you're here shaving your legs, like you're naring yourself up.
Have you ever done nair?
I have done nair.
How'd you feel about it?
I have decently, no, actually, I would say I have skin is probably a bit more sensitive to that since I hardly ever shave.
Yeah.
I was really pleased with it. It's just that it makes a mess and it smells like horrible.
Yeah.
But it works. It works. So
I had a couple
nair will clean you up.
girlfriends break out real bad because of nair.
Mm-hmm.
I won't touch the shit. I'm scared of it.
Was the breakout in that area?
Well, luckily, I shave my legs all the time, and most girls do. No, it's like their whole leg. I don't know anyone who's brave enough to nair like there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's.
Yeah.
Hey,
I wouldn't.
I wouldn't. Hell no.
But yeah, so it starts there, and then show day always starts super early. Like you usually wake up because shows start at 9, even though you probably don't get on stage until like
they tell
12.
you to get there at 9. It's different than the show starting at 9.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But we get a few meals in, we get a general idea of what you look like, and in order for that to happen, you need to be up early and taking care of all those things. So yeah, I think when I think of show day, I think of like waking up early, like crossing my fingers that I wake up kind of sort of looking the way I expected. And it's not that time of the year yet, and it's not so bad now. But I remember when I lived in California, I would get all the text messages from the people on the East Coast. And I'm like, it's like 4 a.m. for you. Like I haven't gone to bed yet, and here I am seeing your first set of pictures.
I'm so bad at sleeping show night. Like at 1 a.m., I'm like, okay, 6 hours of sleep. 2 a.m., okay, 5 hours of sleep, and I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
I'm real bad at it.
Which goes back to the whole, I think even for physique athletes, it's super important to like knowing how to keep your cool and just almost in your head, just not making it a big deal. So I would say, and I think you guys would echo this too, and I think Andrea's experienced this herself. But the more like nervous and the more like fight or flight you are going into the show, like you can drastically change the way you look that day. Mm-hmm. Like it's not a very good look. The fight or flight response does not look fantastic. And if we look at like the mechanisms behind it, it's like, yeah, your body's releasing stored energy and muscle, and it's like that's not what we want. That's the exact opposite we want. We want everything in the muscle. Yeah. We don't want to look spilly and watery. So I do think it starts with a good night's sleep, and hopefully your athlete is in a good state of mind.
It makes me think of stories. So many stories.
Well, yeah, because I can think of a few. I can think of a few where guys, they get that fight or flight response, and physiologically what happens? Blood pools into the guts where we need to, make sure that everything stays alive. And then, of course, then they're like, oh my gosh, where'd my vascularity go? The vascularity's been insane except for today, and
I'm like Friday night.
That kind of stuff shows up.
Every like Friday night, I'm like, Bert, I look like shit. He's like, it's going to be okay. And I wake up Saturday. I look shittier. Calm down. I'm like, I am calm.
Calm down. Breathe. Take a breath.
What's funny, too, is like, but you guys see it when we're at conferences. I'm like, okay, let's go. It's time to go. It's time to, like, I get very, when something matters to me, I can't calm the fuck down. But it doesn't look like you said, it doesn't look like freaking out stress, but Bert goes, you're managing stress, but the fact you have to manage it is stressful. He's like, you don't look like you're losing your shit, and you might tell me you're not losing your shit. And you might mentally be like, don't lose your shit, don't lose your shit, don't lose your shit. But that's management, and that's stress in itself.
Yeah. I mean, you thrive off stress, Andrea. I'd say it. Like, it gets you going. Yeah. However, it's just not a good look.
No, it's not.
And that goes for like all athletes out there. It's typically not a good look, and it's something that it's easier said than done. And to be honest, it's just going to take a few game days in order for you to kind of get that right, and then just
powerlifting meet though, personally, I was like, slept fine, let's go. Whenever, can I have some coffee, guys? Like, I was way more chill. Also not starving, so whatever. Maybe
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And I can vouch for that. You were sleeping very good the night before because I came home from work at like 2:30 a.m. and you were out.
I was on the elliptical the night before. I had too much sushi. I was on your elliptical in your living room for like 30 minutes.
Yeah, you were sleeping soundly when I got home. Girl was ready.
Okay, so we shaved.
Okay. We shaved.
We're hopefully cool, tanned, and we're at the show. What's next as a coach at that point? What does a coach do?
Well, if you're there, it's different, right? I mean, as a coach, I personally, by Friday, they've heard from me. They know what to do Saturday morning, and I think fucking with them would make it worse. But that's because I guess I don't have anyone on my roster that I've seen multiple Saturday mornings, right, with pictures, and you guys maybe do. But I know that you guys, like, say you and the 4 or 5 of us or whatever are at a venue, and the one who's competing wakes up, he's going to come out and be like, hey, what do y'all think? And then you can dictate food intake, right? You and Jeff do that often.
Yeah. And that's something that I would say is I guess the closer your division is to bodybuilding, the more peak week is going to matter.
Yeah.
Whereas we'll say for a bikini athlete, it's more so about having the right amount of carbs, something that is going to lend itself to be predictable, keep them hydrated, keep them cool, well rested, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about bodybuilding, like let's just go like elite level bodybuilding, like that's the main reason that I go to Worlds every single year, because at that point it is a game of inches. So at the amateur level, not as much, simply because there's so many different levels up on that stage, even within bodybuilding.
Yeah.
But you get to the world level, and if you had an extra 50 grams of carbs like for your second meal, like that stuff can like literally like pop you a few placings. It really can. So I guess how much adjusting are you going to do the day of? Ideally not too much, because even if it is the right move, it can be stressing for an athlete to tell them, you know what, I know we put down 50 grams of carbohydrates, can you handle 125? That's probably the one time that an athlete can be like, I don't really look forward to this food. We're changing the plan. Is something wrong? So predictable and the minimal adjustments, that is the goal, but sometimes it doesn't work that way, especially when we're talking about higher level bodybuilding.
Yeah. There's always, I think, way back on y'all's channel, there was y'all went on a while about how someone like Eric got spilled way the fuck over.
Oh.
And y'all made him drink.
Up,
yeah. Y'all made him drink a couple shit ton.
Weekend. Yeah, that was that same weekend.
So Brad, you were there for that. Yeah, you got to experience that and see the ups and downs.
Right here. Yeah, it was right here in our kitchen, We were looking at him and we were like, is he spilled? Is he flat, And so we kept feeding him thinking he was flat, and yeah, it was kind of one of those things where it's like he made the call. Eric actually made the call. Eric was like, I'm spilled. He says, I have no problem getting a pump here. There's no doubt about it. I'm spilled, And so this show was in Reno. We came back here, which is a 45-minute drive, right? Mm-hmm. We came back here, and Jeff just says, you know what? No more food, nothing more to eat. At this point, it's going to be black coffee and water only. And I remember vividly. I mean, this is the only time I've ever seen this happen. We're doing the night show. There's a different judge judging the night show than this was there for the pre-judging. And the night show actually goes up onto the stage, looks at everybody's numbers, and replaces them. Huh. He makes a call right there that night. I've never seen it before. Jeff was like, he's replacing him. I've seen this one other time, And yeah, sure enough, we had cleaned up Eric to the point to where all those spilled carbs got transported into the muscle, cleaned him up, got him fuller and crisper on stage. They actually replaced him. He won his pro card.
Word.
So that was one of those game day, kind of strategic call decisions that actually got him the placing that he needed.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. I think though, to clarify for listeners, right? Because just because it exists in the world, way more non-competitors or people interested in competing or interested in looking a certain way than actual been on stage athletes. That we're saying, oh shit, Eric's physique changed overnight, da, da, da. But it's one, nothing that you would notice if you weren't trained, first off. And two, those differences can kind of only happen with tricks like that when you are that lean.
Exactly.
So it's not like you're going to the beach. Yeah, it's not like, oh shit, I'm going to go to the beach with my friends this weekend. Right before I go, I'm going to have nothing but black coffee and water and look different. Like, most people won't. It's just, in certain situations, under certain trained eyes, it makes a difference. I just want to get that out there.
Yeah, because, I mean, you're talking about this much tissue, you know, between the skin surface and the muscle and this much tissue, you know. And so when there's this much tissue, 1% hydration can make it look dramatically different. Whereas this much tissue, 1% hydration, you're never going to see it.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's morning and during the show tweaks. I mean, do we talk about whether you guys have been like, hey, go pump up more, or like, hey, chill out, you're not gonna be able to hold your poses because you're worn the fuck out, kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we do a great job in standardizing that for the athletes. So they're not that one athlete that's been pumping up since like 9 a.m. when they got there.
The nervous pumps are just going.
Yeah, they got a whole workout. They got double days. So we try to control as much as possible. And if we are there on show day, I think that's one of the reasons that actually people come and do the mayhem, because, you know, there's a bunch of us floating around. Generally, 80% of the time, like, my job is to keep an athlete aware of where we're at in the show, to keep them calm, and that's basically it. Very hardly often, if we messed up on the peak week, it usually is something that was a few days prior, and there's not much we can do outside of adding more food. So I guess you could say our peak weeks tend to be a bit more conservative, because if you need a little bit more the day of, you can do that.
Yeah.
But we try to make it so that we hit that day with, and we have to make minimal changes on that day. But there has been a few times where making the right adjustment the day of. Actually, my friend Brian Miner, who I was training with today, remember his peak week back in 2012? Like, we completely had to throw away the day of, and it was his first pro show. And it was one of those things where it's like, man, like, this is no longer like an amateur show. Like, it's a game of inches, and there's going to be a few guys that are showing up there. One guy in particular who was like an absolute legend. I think Brian ended up winning that show, actually. So, but I remember, we basically doubled his carb intake that morning. And then here's another one. They work you when you're a pro on stage. Like, it's crazy. My first show, I recall, a 45-minute symmetry round before we hit a front double bicep. That was old school WMBF over there back then. That was no joke. You were there to compete. It felt like you were competing, and that's also going to drastically change how much food you might have in the evening, because it can happen. They have you up there going hard. We ended up being up there for over an hour. That's gonna definitely affect what we look like.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, and when you talk about using the pump up, Andrea, you know, sometimes we can use that to kind of help clean up too. Because I remember last year I had an athlete that I purposely got pretty darn full because I knew there was going to be a lot of waiting. And as soon as I showed up at the venue, I could kind of see, I think we are a little bit on the soft side. I want you to just go out, take your band out there in the sun. Let's keep nice and warm. I want you to sip water, and I just want you to just get a nice, slow, gradual pump up. And I mean, this is not typical, but it was a tool that we used like an hour or two before stage time, you know, that we could kind of say, okay, let's just get a nice, slow, gradual, nothing strategic, you know, like real fancy, you know, techniques or anything. Just do, you know, slow kind of 3 minutes of this, and then rest for a second and talk. And it chilled her out. She got calm, and her look started looking better and better and better. And that was kind of one of those cases where we're like, okay, we just need to use this pump up to calm you down a little bit, you know. And then those nerves started getting settled, and then we started seeing what we normally see.
Word. Dude, I don't know.
One
What else?
question.
Yes, go.
Well, one question we're going to get is how do you know if someone's flat, spilled over,
Oh, okay.
that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Right. With powerlifting, it's a lot easier. If someone they're just not as whippy during their warm ups, you can go and you can adjust openers up to a certain point, and
Which we'll get
but with
to.
powerlifting, which is very easy. Like you just look at how it's moving. That's kind of off. We might be having an off day on our bench press. Let's go change this. With bodybuilding, it's like, so how do you identify that? I think typically, like again, like the overcarb, spilled over look, or the flat look probably matters more in those divisions where you're leaner. So for sure in bodybuilding, how are you able to identify that? To be honest, that's just something that's going to come with time, as you like go through many preps with many different athletes. And there's this nice spot where when we start prepping, we're still kind of full and we look pretty good. We're lean, we're not chronically flat, but you get deeper into the diet, like you start to notice it, like, man, like this picture, like dude looks like straight two-dimensional at this point. Like it looks like a mummified carcass, right? But like you see enough of that, and you kind of you start to develop a knack for identifying like what's flat, what isn't, what is, and especially like in that specific person. But it's something that's just, honestly, it comes with time, it comes with practice. And I think the majority of my practice was probably honed in on myself.
Yeah, I was going to say that if anyone doesn't know what full and hard versus flat feels like, probably hasn't contest prep dieted, because I feel like if you've done it yourself.
Or at least they haven't been lean enough.
Yeah, if you've done it yourself and gotten like pretty freaking lean, when you wake up, I am flat. And when I am training 2 hours later after breakfast, oh shit, I look like I lift. And then before bed, I feel like I'm fat and I don't lift. Like that's just like the daily.
Exactly.
At least for me, anyways, the last 2 months of prep, it's like, God, I'm a skinny piece of shit. And then I'm at the gym and Brandon's taking pictures and I'm like, yeah. And then like I go eat my meal and I'm like, look down at my stomach. I'm like, now I'm just fat and soft and I don't have any muscles. So like, now what? And then that happens every day. Like there's this cycle of like, I hate myself, I love myself, I hate myself. And you'll know.
But it takes practice.
Yeah,
it takes practice, and it's usually because let's be honest, when you guys are dieting for shows, there's a few physical examinations that take place. Like, why is Brad taking so long in that bathroom while they're in their flexing?
Why is the gym so long? Because I'm with Brandon and Matt, and we're all taking pictures of each other for the Instagrams. That's why. Yeah.
So yeah, you tend to examine yourself a few times, usually a few times over the course of the day, and you start to see like, hey, these are the fluctuations. I can tell I had my higher carb day, 2 days ago. Like I look good, but I won't in 2 days. Damn it, I'm gonna look flat in 2 days. And exactly. So it's something that you need to have experienced. I would say ideally the best way to start is on yourself, and then eventually, because you can with yourself, like you can feel it and see it. You can feel flatness, and then with other people, it's like you it's not like you can touch their muscles usually and gauge what's happening. But yeah, over time you develop a knack for identifying like what flat is, because there is times where you think someone is maybe they're lacking some definition, and someone who is not very well versed in that can look at that physique and they would think, oh man, this person is overcarbed because there's not a lot of detail showing. But no, the issue is the exact opposite. They are undercarbed. They need more carbohydrates so that these muscles can pop through the skin. Yeah. So yeah, it's just something it's so subjective, like everything else in bodybuilding. It's trenches time.
And then I remember one of the pieces of advice that you gave me, Berto, was that, kind of start to get your go-to, body parts on your athlete. Because I know that like one of the things that you kind of gave me advice on was, kind of look at those thinner muscle bellies, look at those, their abdominals and sometimes the thin little cables in the hamstrings, And again, obviously you're going to have to be very lean, in order to spot those kind of things. But if the splits that are usually there during your training when you're hydrated and you're fed, that are in the hamstrings are not there, in the physique photos, then yeah, that's a pretty good indication, looking at that particular body part, that probably you are just a touch flat, and then it's a matter of putting all the pieces together. Okay, the hamstrings are flat. Is that just one area where we're flat and everything else is looking pretty darn good? Well, maybe now we just subtly adjust carbohydrate intake, or we subtly, increase water intake. Whereas, if it's kind of like, well, that is on top of, I can't get a pump, I can't see the splits in my abs that I normally see or whatever. Well, then now we probably need to make a bigger adjustment, as far as carbohydrate intake and water intake goes. And that's where being there is obviously a very handy thing to do. But then outside of that, just keeping in communication, sometimes just, kind of being there for the person, even if you can't do anything because they, ate all their food before 1 a.m.
Oh, yeah, you had that.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, I've had that. But
just keep them calm. Just keep in touch with them. It's all good. It's all good.
Tell me, Bert.
We have time. Oh, man. Before I go on to that really funny story, there's another, I guess, let's throw in another wrench, right? Sometimes someone might look flat, and to be honest, it's it just comes down to this. So learning to identify how hydrated they are, that's another one. Sometimes it's not carbs. Sometimes it's a sodium and water thing. So again, it's just something that over time you're going to have to develop a knack for, and you're going to get it wrong quite a few times early on. But that's how you get good at anything. So funny story. This was hilarious. This happened to me a few years back with a client who will obviously. They sent me their pictures. This was the day before the show, and they were just looking soft and not how I expected on that day. And this was Friday, early Friday their time, and so I'm like, you know what? Some of that food we have planned today, we're gonna have to pull back on it because you're not looking as tight as I expected today. And I get an email that it's too late. They finished their food. And I stop and I'm like, what do you mean? And I started to feel bad because I'm like, shoot, is this person not in the US? Are they in some other country? Because I could have sworn this person lived in Pennsylvania. And I remember asking, so what's your time zone? It's just I'd give away that I completely was oblivious to this fact that we're not in the same country, and it was the Eastern time zone. They finished all their food by 10 in the morning.
The whole day of food by 10 in the morning.
The whole protein too. Do you have anything left?
10 a.m. No. I thought you said it was 1 a.m.
It was some weird time. It was some, I think
it was not the PM. That's all we know. It was not the PM.
Yeah. That's what happened. It was Thursday was just finished. We're entering Friday now, and they must have been waiting by that clock like this, waiting for it to strike midnight for the macro reset, right?
Oh my
right?
God!
And I had no idea. I had no idea that this was what was happening, because the whole time they got very lean. They were very consistent. We never binged once. They never deviated from the plan. So I obviously thought everything was right and handled, and I guess not. But yeah. So I just remember telling this person, you know what, we'll just clean up on Saturday a little bit, and also, again, we're going to be fasting for a few hours, so maybe you'll clean up. They ended up looking pretty good, but yeah, that was my funny. This is where the coach lost it on game day.
Disorientation.
Yeah, and I think too, I mentioned this a long time ago in the whenever we did the Peak Week podcast, but the way, me being the newbie coach, right, other than on myself, the safest way I could do it was run a mock high day a week and a half before, and have them send me pictures every morning so I can see what this person looks like the day after, 2 days after, 3 days after, 4 days after, and then I just kind of pick one, whichever one we look the tightest, and all the pictures being, this is where same lighting every day, same type of clothes matters, because then you just compare them in my phone, and I'm like, okay, this is how far out we'll do a big high day kind of thing.
And And that's where those diet breaks really kind of come in handy, because not only do the diet breaks help accelerate fat loss, but you can do a mock meet, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I remember that's how I actually, I'm sure we all kind of came up with it about the same time, but I kind of crossed it over into our power lifters. When our power lifters are running that final deload before they run their intensity block, it's kind of a good time. Let's go ahead and do a little test here, and let's do a trial run, of what the meet day might look like. And let's go ahead and pick a Saturday when you're going to go in the gym and you're going to do your 3 attempts on squat, 3 attempts on bench press, 3 attempts on deadlift, and get a glimpse of that. We can kind of do that with our bodybuilders, too, and kind of say, okay, it's a diet break. Let's go ahead and take our two days together and put them together into one day and split it up this way, and then get pictures a day after, 2 days after, 3 hours, 3 days after, and let's kind of get a glimpse of what we might see in kind of a mock show type of an environment.
Well, let's go.
Plus, that reveals a lot too, as far as your look when they're relaxed versus when they're tense. Because obviously they're going to be relaxed if you're running a mock and they're just doing their thing and they're just sending their photos. And if you run the same plan and it's the day of the show and they're not looking the same, you can say, you know what, you just need to calm down and chill out here.
Yeah, Are we good to go ahead and then switch into powerlifting? Kind of keep going with Brad?
Brad said meet when he should have said show, so I think Brad's mind's on powerlifting. Too much of a powerlifter these days.
The only thing that I think that we probably should touch on for coaches out there that are kind of doing strategic planning for placing is to learn from my experience and make sure you communicate that to your athlete. Because I remember the first time that I was really kind of planning for placing for an athlete, it was one of those rare times where it worked out. We've got these 2 shows that are a certain time period apart, and this first show, it's going to be okay. We're going to plan to lean on your symmetry on this show here, knowing full well that you look at the past winners here, and they don't really lean towards the folks that are really really shredded and really really lean. They kind of tend to lean towards those folks that have the symmetry and the size. And then, of course, the second show, which was 4 weeks later, it's going to give us enough time to kind of tailor things for that show and get leaner. And, of course, it worked out pretty good. The athlete ended up, I want to say, 3rd out of a pretty stacked lineup. And then, of course, the check-in that I get after the show, the tears are flowing, and they're like, I placed well and I was very happy, but I didn't get the look that I was after. And that was my fault. That was my fault for planning and kind of strategizing for placing when this person, placing was there, but they were more so concerned on eclipsing their previous best as far as their conditioning goes. That's kind of what they were ultimately, that was their prize, that was their trophy.
Yeah.
So that when you're doing, especially kind of in depth, research and strategizing for your athlete, make sure you communicate to that, because I probably should have done that. I probably should have said, okay, look, are we okay to kind of come into this first show knowing full well this is kind of the way that they like to see things, and the athletes tend to place better if we don't necessarily get your internal goal, right here with this first show. We kind of chase for that the second show, So I think that's the one thing that we need to make sure that we get across is that ultimate, coach-client communication needs to make sure that you're in place when you are strategizing.
Yeah. That's funny because most people would want the placing.
Yeah,
so that is a surprise. That's a nice surprise, I guess.
It's a very refreshing surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
One last thing.
Oh, go ahead.
No. This is I'm skipping over your part, but carry on, and then I'll go.
No, go ahead.
The last part. Okay. Well, the last part of the game day.
Oh, game day,
and especially for physique athletes, is what does everyone look forward to as soon as the show's over? What are they going to do?
The meal.
Exactly, pizza. That meal. And I think that is often something that, unfortunately, I have to close down the party before it started.
Yeah.
Especially when athletes maybe we're not as lean as we'd like to be. Maybe giving them a taste of blood is not a good thing because you kind of know what you know your athlete at that point, or maybe it's just not in the right time, maybe you have a show the next week. So I guess in regards to that, that's definitely something that's worth touching upon, because it's a tradition. Like after the show's over, it's what you do. You go out, you pig out, but it's not always in certain situations the right thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, it can ruin your season.
It can ruin your season.
Yeah.
I've that happen, or it can make you look not so good for your next show, or
yeah.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
often
You're
you have to
already
skip it.
strategic planning for the next show.
I
Yeah.
remember Cleva, Steve Cleva was telling us that one time he drove somewhere like out of state he was doing like 3 shows 3 weekends in a row or something. Is that right, Bert?
Mm,
And that
I remember that.
it
That
was
was
like
hectic. Yeah.
it was like his second of 3, and he didn't want to mess up and he didn't want to binge, so like he had this long drive home and he had like 3 reams of rice cakes, like the whole fucking thing. He was just like, I couldn't stop drinking, but I couldn't stop eating, but I didn't want to mess it up. So he literally had like 3 bags of rice cakes. He was like, I was shitting all the next day. I was like, God. Hey, but he looked good. He did
He
look
looked
good.
fantastic. Yeah. I was like, you know what? That's probably not the best thing you could have done, but
Not the worst.
that was really crafty on your part. Yeah, exactly. We'll just really carb load some more. But yeah, no, often you have to play bad guy. And to be honest,
Yeah.
I think that meal is usually for certain athletes, like for example, like a small female athlete, it might not be the best thing for them, because females just don't have the same capacity. They're not as resilient in some ways.
Yeah.
So, you can set yourself back to the point where it's like, hey, we just lost like 3 weeks because like
Yeah.
That dinner. Yeah.
you had
Yeah. When pizza happens, that pizza's only end of season for me. That's not between season. I don't think that would be a good idea for me.
Yeah, that's actually something I'm going to do this season. I'm going to, after every show, I'm going to set an example for all the homies around here, and we're going to go back home and have a great salad or something. Or whiskey shots or something. But I guess that concludes one whiskey shot, 70 calories, and it's got a high thermic value.
I remember though, after my second show, I was like, we're going to go to the salad bar place. And then we go to the salad bar place, and it had no meat. It was just salad. And so we walked across the street to IHOP to get me a big old omelet, because I was like, how can I have no proteins after my show? Like, oh my God. And I was like, we're going to be good and have a salad. It was just bread and like lettuce at this whole place and like a garden.
That was awful. And soups.
And soups. I was trying to pick the chickens out of the chicken noodle.
That was the lack of strategic planning on your part there,
I thought
Coach
sweet tomatoes. It was sweet tomatoes, and I could have sworn when I lived in Houston they had a lot of like grilled chicken to put on your salad, and this one they're like, oh no, we stopped that like 4 months ago or something, and I was like, sweet lettuce. So I had to go have like 2 omelets or something. That was a rough one.
But yeah, now converting to the day that we actually do have a little bit of control, and we're not just hoping for the best. Hey, that's I'm a little bit envious of our strength athletes and our friends over at TSA, and all those powerlifting athletes, when you do get to actually have control over your placing, and you do actually have say over, I'm going to go ahead and settle for second here and get a PR, as opposed to really go for something big and winning.
Yeah, there's decision making that actually like
there is. And you have control. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a very the first time I experienced that, I was like, I love this. There's no more hoping for the best,
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point, right? So let's go over all the things that you do have control of. Like you said, you could say, I want to PR my bench press versus go for the total kind of thing. Like those kinds of things can happen, right? And vice versa, I guess, if you hold back on something in order to have a higher total. You can also, I guess, if you're at the top of play, like if you know it's like you versus 3 people, and you see and you know those people's totals, and you've been competing against them all damn season, this definitely is like more of an upper level thing. But you can manipulate your choices in accordance to what they complete and what they don't. Correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
And a good a good example of that was that last year's Raw Nationals. They actually, if I recall, and Bert, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but they actually lowered Bryce's third attempt on deadlift because he was so far ahead. Correct, Bert? And they wanted to make sure that he only needed, I think a minimum lift to get the win. And then also to make sure they were being very strict on their officiating. And I had never seen so many red lights on deadlifts in all my life. So they actually lowered his third attempt to a lift that they knew that they would win. But then he had a better chance of not only completing the lift, but then less technical issues as far as red lighting and pitching and things like that. Is that correct, Bert, when I say that?
Yeah, in Bryce's case, it was a trip to Worlds. So that was on the line. If he goofed, it's like, you're not going to Worlds. You went for something that you could possibly get. Didn't get it because Bryce is human, right? And he only needed that, and that was the right call. I don't know. Yeah.
Is he human?
He's some weird robot that does everything. Good at everything.
Yeah, and
he does everything.
And doesn't break on top of it, so he's literally a cyborg. But yeah, that's and then there's the other end of the spectrum, like we've probably Bert and I have encountered before. It's like, okay, you know what, it's come down to this final lift, if I can pull this, I can win. But I've never done that before. And I don't know if I can do that. But I can go ahead and go for a PR and go for something that I'm pretty sure I can get. And then settle, for second place, knowing full well that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose to get second place and get this PR over going for something that could get me the win and missing it. And then, of course, for me, and in that case, that was a very satisfying thing. So satisfying that I went ahead and passed out afterwards. So.
Yes. If Steve's listening, can he link to that? Steve, can you pull up the Brad passing out video?
Yeah, we should have that.
Sure.
We should have a square with like Brad passing out. It should be something romantic. Something about grinding. So Brad, at some point in this podcast, say something about the grind, and we'll use that on the square. I haven't said many things during this podcast that are square appropriate. I usually try to, I write things down.
No, you don't. Do you? Watch, there's a little post-it in your computer screen corner.
You guys just naturally say things that are square appropriate, whereas I never do. So I guess I'm too long-winded and I'm rambling.
I think you do.
But us as competitive athletes, to me, that's kind of like the ultimate. For me, I'm never going to be elite, in any of the sports that, I would like to be in. So that's kind of like the ultimate competitive outlet, is that you actually have control over your placing, which is something that in bodybuilding I've never had before, ever.
Brad, where did you place in the Masters?
Were you second in the nation? Get out of here with your not good at anything.
Yeah. And he decided to go. He decided to go lift in the young man's platform. They gave you the option, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you went to go lift with went to go lift with the open. So it was really hard. And that it goes back to just doing your job. Athletes come into the meets expecting. Sometimes it's we've trained to put ourselves in a position where we can maybe get these milestone lifts. And often everything's gone well. During that last block where we're tapering into the meet, everything's been like clockwork, but things happen and we just don't have it the day of. Again, your best chance at the end of the day is to go 949. I've seen many athletes, even high level powerlifters, that on the day of the big meet, they go for what they want as opposed to what they actually realistically have.
Yeah.
That's a big one is what you maybe hit, what your openers maybe look like a couple days before the meet. That might not be what you have that day. And I think that is hard to be the messenger, the coach on that day where, it's hey, we're gonna have to go with our plan C lifts today on the deadlift. You just don't have it. So I think that is actually important, is if you do have to downgrade what we're capable of on that day, if you have to adjust to that, I think it's very handy to have everything all written out so that It's not that the athlete doesn't feel like they did something wrong, that you did something wrong. This is part of what we planned for just in case. And plan A is just that, it's plan A. But
Right.
I mean,
Well, let's talk about how we come up with a plan A, I guess, as coaches, right? Because we have I think we all use the same or similar attempt selection calculations, right?
Uh-huh.
And usually the attempt one is like somewhere in is it 90, 92, 5, 95? What do y'all leave that up to the athlete?
it depends on the athlete too.
Yeah. Depends on the athlete.
Definitely depends on the athlete. Yeah, because some athletes, like I could probably go for a 90%, but other athletes, they're not good at grinding. They're not good at being patient with a lift, and so we're going to go for something that is very doable. Like 85%.
Yeah,
so,
I feel like it's weirdly inverse too. Like how we talked about the more with bodybuilding, the leaner and more experienced you are, the inches matter, right? And I feel like when athletes are kind of newer-ish, like a 90% is easier than when you like actually know what 100% feels like. Like a 90% for me is probably going to hit more often than not than someone like a Bryce or a LS McLean or like a whatever, like they're, in my opinion. Would y'all agree with that or no?
Yeah, and I think the other one, this was specifically like nationals with like I had two younger athletes on one day, and I just remember stepping into the arena where the powerlifting was going on, and man, it was overwhelming. Like, and I put myself in their place, like to open up that curtain, and you're like in the middle of
Walk out.
the biggest powerlifting meet that's like ever happened in this country.
Yeah.
Like right away, I'm like, dude, we're opening like 88%. Like, I'm sorry. Like,
you don't need any freakouts. Yeah.
And they all had slow first squats too. So they all had slow first squats. So they were definitely a bit distracted by that. So yeah, what you have in the gym with your own bars, with your buddies there, training
with the same
at
spotting,
same time,
not having a crowd looking at you. Yeah.
Same time you train at every single day.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really difficult for newer athletes to bring that to the day of. So, in regards to attempt selection, that's one thing I think we all here can agree on is it's better to be conservative, go 949, and often you will have athletes that don't hit a single PR the day of, but they get a PR total because they got every single lift, and that's how you place higher. That's what they don't care how much you squat, but you got one on the bench press. So yeah, I think I'd say conservative is better. And
like you said, Bert, have it all written down. And not just in pounds, but we have to remember that we're also in this arena now where a lot of competitions use the metric system, and it's in kgs. And I actually did have a client go 9 for 9, but their first deadlift, they were thinking in pounds, gave them the pounds when the scorers were thinking in kg. So
jeez.
She went ahead and gave him her lift, and it was like, I think it was like 137 pounds or something like that. And so make sure you've got it all written down right there, because if you can. Those nerves sometimes they do take effect, and you want to make sure that you want to try to make everything as brainless as possible. And kind of like we were talking about leading into the bodybuilding show and peak week and making sure that we're all shaved the morning of, probably a good idea, to kind of going into that particular day, not only have everything written out, but as you're warming up. A lot of times for first timers, I'll say, you know what? Let's go ahead and hit your opener backstage. Let's go ahead and do your entire warm up and then hit your opener, because their opener is that conservative that they can actually do that as part of their warm up. And then, of course, when they do open up that curtain and there's all those people out there in front of them, and there's these three guys with these little handheld controllers going like this, there's a peace of mind to know, I just did this. I just did this back there. And, as long as I keep my head and listen for my commands, I've got this, know. And then we can go ahead and start looking at the plan that we've got written out, and we can say, okay, well, let's go ahead and go with our plan. Or we can go, okay, let's go a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter, or what have you. But yeah, that's that's all that fun, preparation and doing all of your strategic planning up to the event that is, all should be in place before you even get there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing that you said there too, was you were like, if I have a beginner and it's conservative enough, whereas again, you wouldn't have an elite powerlifter do their 88% one time, like backstage, like they don't have, it's just too much damn weight, right? But but someone who's new, that's possible. Yeah, and so I think what's important here is, like, with us as coaches, that's just, you can't say with all my athletes they do this same first opener at this certain percentage. You're saying if someone's never been on a platform and doesn't know what it's like to be stared at versus someone who's, this is their 20th competition kind of thing. So I think that it's just another reason why coaching is valuable. That's all.
Oh, let's backtrack a little bit to, I think, one thing we forgot.
Commands.
Because a lot of our athletes compete in the USAPL. What happens the day of is you have weigh-ins. And
that's a good point. Yeah.
90% of people they usually have to, or they want to diet for a certain class. And ideally, like, this is something you settled with him weeks ago. You decided whether or not you're going to diet or diet going into the meet. Ideally, I just think it works. How wonderful is it to, like, taper down in regards to, like, volume, and you're eating the whole way? That makes for a very predictable day of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we'll start with the weigh-ins. Had one kid this year, I forgot what was the story, this past nationals, but we made it, like, we were barely there. He was at the very top of the class. He was like the one person that had that rounded number. And someone told him to stand on his head. It was an old, like, wrestler. Yeah, what? Exactly. It was an old wrestling trick.
It works. It works.
No, it doesn't work.
Go ahead and finish.
What are you talking about?
It will in big person. I'll tell you why in just a second. Go ahead and finish your.
Well, it worked.
Finish.
Okay. So I was like, he told me he did it and it worked. And I'm just like, well, I was trying to do the math, and what I think you're going to say is, like, blood rushes to your head, and somehow that weighs differently on the scale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it changes the distribution. Anyhow,
what?
I was really displeased.
No, Brad, what are you trying to tell me?
I'll tell you in just a second.
Okay.
You finish your story.
Well, I looked on the internet and everything said it was an old wives' tale. But we made it. And I didn't look further into that. I'm like, you're never doing that again. That thing you had last night, you shouldn't have had that last night. Right? Yeah. But it's everything from, like, the weigh-in, equipment check, especially at bigger meets like USAPL Nationals. There's only certain things that you can wear, and they tend to differ from what you can use at local meets. So I had to supply singlets for certain lifters. There was knee sleeves that were going around and being borrowed. So preparation, it's like knowing basically what you're allowed to bring. So the equipment needs to be on point. The weight is hopefully where you want it to be, and that's something that you should, like, not wait until, you shouldn't be spitting, ideally, into a cup to make weight the morning of, or stand on your head, much less, right? But yeah, I think there's all these little things that, in the excitement of, like, the meet, athletes can kind of, like, forget about. So I always make sure that I have extra this, extra that, like baby powder. We have chalk, nose torque. I'll bring my belt just in case. I have my sleeves, my wraps, icy hot, ibuprofen, all these things that your lifters should have, and they usually probably do have in their gym bag when they are at the gym, but
they forgot to pack it this time, yeah. Or they brought the wrong one.
Your soccer mom the day of, in many ways.
Soccer mom.
So Brad, the head.
Tell me about this.
Yeah, I'm writing down my next topic so I don't forget about it. But again, this is, you got to keep in mind, this is going to work like 0.01% of the time, but a way that you can kind of see how it would work, and it's never going to work on your bathroom scale ever. It's not sensitive enough. But, like, you've seen those scales that they weigh us in on, Vert, at USAPL. I mean, they're sitting there hovering over grams, as they're going around. So if you're on a doctor scale or on one of those real sensitive scales, and you just put your arms up over your head and then stand on the scale, and then real quickly put your arms down, what happens is you'll actually see the scale lighten up for just a quick little second. Like you'll see it jump from like 74.1 kg to 73.8 to 73.6. But then what happens is it settles right back down again. And sometimes you can get away with it if your official is looking at the scale right when that happened, or like say for a doctor scale, if it's, the cutoff is 83 kg, which is 183 pounds, they put the scale right there at 183 pounds and they want to get a lot of people through there. They just leave it at 183 and you stand on it, and if it goes like this, you're no good. But if it goes like this, you're good. Well, if you're standing on your head and all of your guts come up, here, and all the blood kind of pools into your head, you jump on the scale real quick and the thing kind of goes like that. If you just happen to get the official looking at it when it was hovering right there and all of your guts and everything are going back down to your feet, you might get a chance of making weight. And that's kind of that's the scientific reason why that
scientific. Can y'all tell him like lightweight losing my shit? And I'm like, is Brandon going to cut this out or do we leave it? Or okay.
Well, there's nothing in the rule book that says you can't flap your wings like while you're on the scale.
Well, yeah, but they will tell you.
What are you doing?
But yeah, that's kind of where that's kind of the physiology as to why that has rumored to work before. But again, you don't want to start planning, all of your making weight strategies for that. So getting off of that.
I need there to
when
be
you're
like.
Talking about kind of,
I'm gonna start tagging you every time I'm upside down in my post. Be like, I should get on my scale handstand on my scale. Would a handstand make you lighter?
Yeah, like I said, it'll never work on a bathroom scale. It has to be a super, super sensitive scale, like a doctor scale, one that weighs you in grams. But anyway, the last thing you want to do is use that for your planning. So like if you're in between weight classes, and you're kind of thinking, okay, well, I would compete better in this weight class versus this weight class, that's not the right type of approach for, at least in my opinion, for your first-time powerlifter. For your first-time powerlifter, you want to have your lifts planned out. You want to basically go for either PRs or 9 for 9s. But when we're talking about strategizing for placing, if it is something where you're an advanced athlete going for a placing in, in a national competition, going for a spot to Worlds or something like that, first of all, you want to be pretty well within shot of that. And then, take into consideration just that, if I got to spit in a cup, if I've got to, go low carb for the last 3 days and no water in order to make that weight class, that's all stuff that we've had to do. Some of us, I should say, myself included, have had to do before. But the last thing you want to do is go up there, with thinking to yourself, be aggressive on that first lift. You want to make sure that you do take into consideration that your leverages are going to change a little bit. You want to take into consideration that you're going to be a little bit depleted. You're going to be a little bit dry. You might pass out after your attempt, So yeah, when you do have your strategic planning and you are kind of thinking placing, and we're going to go for the weight class that is the best, kind of for us, let's try to get there a little bit earlier, and not have to stand on our head, in order to make that weight class.
Not that we said to do that.
Don't do that. These 3D Muscle Journey guys taught me how to cheat.
It's the secret, y'all.
No, but that is correct, and I think for any athlete out there who has never gone through that peaking phase while eating enough, try that. You'll never want to do it any other way. So ideally you want to come in right. You want to come in with the right stuff. You want to come in with all the well rehearsed for what could happen. There's what you hope happens, and then what realistically might happen, and you will find yourself adjusting at some point. in your powerlifting career. And then after that, I'd say probably the biggest, where I find myself to be most useful the day of, is watching your athlete compete and making the calls for them. And sometimes it's you have athletes that are very conservative and they're like, like, we're going to go with plan B, and it's like, no, you absolutely like ran through that. Let's go with plan A. So being of assistance there. And you remember, Brad, at Nationals, how crazy it was back there. It looked like the freaking stop.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Like there was everyone had a paper in their hand and like, here, get mine in, change that one. Here's what we did.
Exactly.
So it's very valuable for the sake of staying objective to have someone handle you the day of. And then also, especially at bigger meets, where it can be quite hectic and people are putting in attempts and then changing attempts. It's also very important to have a coach who understands the rule book and when you can, I guess, kind of bait people into doing things they shouldn't be doing. It's all part of being competitive. It's nowhere near as dynamic as you would find with weightlifting, but powerlifting at the super high level, when you get to nationals, it can be quite dynamic, and there is a little bit more coaching the day of relative to physique sports.
Yeah, and I think something I want to underscore too is you guys are talking a lot about strategies and like the hectic and the holy shit, but I would say that maybe where that kind of stuff does only happen probably 1 out of every 10 powerlifting meets around the United States. Most of them have far less competitors, far less an audience, much less stressful, not multi-platform, like all that stuff. So I think that there's, I would say like enough that you can I feel like you can ease into that sport at a lower emotional cost, lower, like the mess ups aren't really that big of mess ups versus like, again, if you were in a peak week and it took someone 3 years to get their body to this, like what they did, So, I don't know.
Yeah,
I just don't want to scare anyone out of the sport when it's like, it really can be very low risk. It can be very low risk. It can be very low stress.
And a lot of times those smaller meets where the placings are going to be like first and second, or first, second, and third, a lot of those meets when you're talking strategic planning, it's just more so for your own personal record, or maybe at most a class record, or a state record, or, an American record or something like that. Because I've done that before, and that's a very gratifying thing as a coach where, you have an athlete that can potentially break a record. And so you do kind of do a little more platform coaching, and you do get to call a little bit more of the plays from the sidelines, and you do get to say, okay, you know what? Our peaking plan worked perfectly. We've got, in some organizations, you get a fourth attempt if you've got a legitimate chance at setting an American record. So you get to plan a little bit better. Is it going to matter on the placing? No, but guess what? We got a fourth attempt here because that was an American record. Now you're the American record holder in your class. Maybe it's the submaster, 165 class or something like that. Or maybe just a personal record. Maybe just a personal record where it's kind of like you've never done that 6-plate squat before. Let's start here. Let's go second here and plan B, plan C. And then if all the cards are right, we'll get that personal record of that 315-pound squat on your third attempt.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that's where the fun platform coaching comes in on some of those smaller venues when placing is not really there anyway. So
yeah. Or you don't have like all these elite athletes. It's just to compete jockey, at nationals. It's like it's nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking to coach there. Even as a coach, it's like, man, that's my athlete. Like people are going to see like, do these guys select attempts right? So it's a lot more cutthroaty at the national level. At the regional level, things are, especially at the regional level, things are way more chillax, and that's kind of the vibe. And people know that it's kind of like the farm system for the bigger meets. So they let people get away with a few things here and there, but all for the greater good.
Yeah. What about something I don't like about all of this in general, because I grew up in gymnastics, so actually coaching gymnastics meet is way more involved than any of this, so it's not, that's a whole different animal. But what I did, something they did right, was timed warm-ups for everybody. You have, your squads can only be so big. There's only so much time from when you warm up to when your last athlete would compete. You know how it's going to go. Sessions are anywhere from 2 to 4 hours max, like all this stuff, right? Whereas I've been to a powerlifting meet where within 3 hours you're done, and I've been to a powerlifting meet that was like 10 hours. And I think, like I just had one of my athletes do his first meet, and he brought some snacks, and he had his dose of caffeine, and his meet was like all damn day. And he was like, I just ran out. I was tired by the time deadlifts came around. My caffeine had worn off, but I didn't want to take another one because like I didn't know what was happening. And like that's something that I don't know, I would struggle with. Because I've only done a powerlifting meet, whatever. But I know that's not so much of a coaching thing, but I think that I was not aware before. I mean, now I've been to like 20 plus powerlifting meets, but before I didn't realize like how much they can differ in their format without you knowing until you're there. Whereas a bodybuilding show, usually like night before, day before, there's a tentative schedule. But powerlifting meet, a lot of times, especially regional one, you're not going to go the day before. You just show up, and there might be 5 people, there might be 50, there might be 100. And it just kind of, and I guess that depends on organization too. Is that right?
To a certain extent,
well,
you know,
organization. Bert and I are both talking at the same time because I know we're thinking the same thing in this last run out.
Okay, somebody go.
Well, basically, I'll segue this to some of the lifters on day one were lifting at 1 a.m.
What?
And it was not due to really lack of organization. It was the promoters had good intentions in mind. It's just the plan did not work out.
Yeah.
And Berto, you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
It's honestly it's one of those things that you just pick up the longer you do powerlifting.
Yeah.
That, like what you said, like you can have a meet that, you know, it's done in 4 hours. You can have a meet that takes 10 hours.
Yeah.
And it's kind of part of the deal. And I think you do enough of these. I remember my first one, I was a little taken back by it. I'm like, this is unlike like other sports. We have 4 quarters, right? Right. So yeah, that is one of those things where it's different because, you know, even bodybuilding, like the shows, sometimes especially big shows, run really late. But the thing is that for the most part, the way you look is the way you look, right? We discussed this before, but powerlifting is a little bit different where you have to perform, and like the most taxing lift is the last one of the day, and your third squats might have happened at 10 in the morning. It is now 4 p.m.
Yeah,
that does happen, and so adjusting to that is something you just kind of have to get good at. And the thing is, if it's affecting you as an athlete, it's probably affecting everyone else too. So it ends up being pretty even.
Level playing field, yeah.
Okay.
Unlike weightlifting, which is very structured.
Very structured.
With weightlifting, you've got 2 minutes to get in your next attempt, and then you've got 1 minute to get on that platform, and it's a lot more structured.
I don't know what I would do.
That time just goes.
I don't know what I would do if I missed some shit and had to go out and come back. I don't know what I would do. That seems so high stress to me. So high stress.
For those of you who don't know how weightlifting works, it is pretty gnarly. I mean, if you're the heaviest lifter of the day, like you're just chilling in the back. You're like, I'm gonna get these last 3. I'm gonna be the last one to go up, and you have to follow yourself. Which you don't with powerlifting.
Coaching wise too, do you guys, when y'all are at meets, if you have any 3D athletes, do you guys always lift them off on their bench? That's just a personal question.
Not always.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not always. Because a lot of times we're coaching a few athletes, and sometimes they train together. Yeah. So they kind of like hit up these beats all together. And so a lot of times I'll just say, you know what? You train with him all the time. You know exactly where he wants to bar. You go ahead and lift him off. Yeah. Other meets, big meets, national meets, you can't do it. They have a designated person that does those lifts off, for every single athlete. And they're actually pretty darn good. I mean, I have to admit that they are very consistent.
They are very consistent.
Liftoffs, and they are able to kind of customize it to each individual athlete. But when push comes to shove,
I hate
and that athlete is going for a PR, I would much rather lift them off than have them just do it themselves, or have some random kind of a gym bro go up there and just grab the bar and pull it off for them.
I hate when other people give me lifts off besides B and Bert. And
they
I
have
hate
this
it.
guy at Nationals. No, they have this guy at Nationals. They fly in to do the liftoffs.
No,
because he is
he's the liftoff guy.
He's on all the big platforms, and he's a scary looking man. And he is like done at the end of the day. He's like all just sweaty, humongous, muscular, and he would tell you encouraging things after your lift. But like everyone who gets lifted off by this dude, they're like, "That's the best lift off I've ever had." Best lift off. Yeah, so he's a lift off. I wish I can recall his name. A little side note that I wanted to bring up is this is where, like, I think a lot of the people who are specifically physique athletes will be like, "What, really? It works that way?" Often, especially at big meets, like we will have athletes like given over to us by other like cousin coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, like I'm gonna be on this platform. My other athlete's all the way on that other platform. If you have nobody, can you help me out? And I think physique sports are a little bit more, I guess, dare I say, catty, that you won't see that happening.
Territorial.
Right? A little bit more. Whereas, they'll give you their sheet, they'll tell you where they're prone to being stuck, what looks like a good day, what looks like a bad day. Here's my phone. This is what it should look like. So yeah, I like that part. That if you want to see everyone have their best day, that's really what it comes down to at the end with powerlifting. And it's such an awesome vibe and such a fun experience for both the coaches and the athletes, and it's one big happy family.
Oh, that's nice. They're cousins. They're lifting cousins. What else happens on show day, meet day?
You can eat after the show.
During the show.
Yeah, shoot. You don't have to worry about spilling over.
No. Yeah. It's big. It was like, what do I eat the day up?
I'm like, whatever you always eat, whatever you like to eat. We've talked about this before, Bert, not lately, but how, because there is the weigh-in, what organizations have like the day before or the evening before or the whatever weigh-ins? Pretty much.
The good ones have the day of.
Yeah, but a lot of them don't.
Yeah, correct. USPA does the night. No, they do the morning before.
USPA is a good federation.
Like a 24-hour, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are not tested, but they are a good federation.
If you lift on Saturday morning, you're going to do your weigh-ins Friday morning. Some of the smaller organizations will do a night before weigh-in, or what they call an early weigh-in, where you're weighing in between like 6 and 9, Friday morning for a Saturday morning lift. But outside of the US APL, Bert, what other organizations do a morning of weigh-in? Do you know?
Not any that I can think of, to be honest. And if they are, they're all like IPF affiliates. They might be named something because different, but that's because they're like in some other country. But yeah, 2-hour weigh-ins is, I think it's just it's an IPF thing as far as I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
there's 24-hour weigh-ins. That's a different animal. And
what I was saying is we've seen people who do all this crazy shit to make weigh-in and then eat all the foods to the point where it's hindering their performance because now you ate some shit and your stomach hurts and you're bloated and your body doesn't know how to deal with it. And like, there's those kind of mess ups though too.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen experienced lifters who had it was a pretty risque attempt to make a certain weight, but they had a system in place, a system that involved IVs. Like there was this was like refined. Like we're gonna do this right, and it's like even the day of for a lot of these lifters, it's like, why do you think you're missing that pop? And half the time they can tell you like, yeah, because I lost 25 pounds to get into the 198s or what have you. So
yeah.
It usually always just leads to other negative things that are oftentimes done because yeah, you don't have their performance on the day of that you normally have because you just dropped 20, 25 pounds and now you're trying to gain back 20, 25 pounds. It just leads to other things. You know, like, I don't know if you've heard the horror stories of, you know, way back in like the 80s and early 90s of, you know, folks that were taking stimulants to get their performance back. And, you know, it's not like a ephedra, you know. And that's, it's almost like a bad analogy, but like some people say that, you know, pot's usually the segue drug into other more serious drugs like, you know, heroin and whatnot. The gateway. There you go. Good. Yeah. You're always so good with words. But sometimes when you're doing drastic things like that, that's the gateway to doing other things so that you perform at your normal levels because you've done all these negative things trying to, you know, to compete at the best. Yeah. There's healthy ways to strategize for placing, and then obviously we just touched on very unhealthy ways to strategize for placing.
Well, and just, I think, coming from a performance athlete background, I know that just zero changes for me has always been the best in any realm of any athletic endeavor. When we change things, whether that's food choices, doesn't have to be like the amount. It's just if I eat weird shit and my stomach hurts and I'm nervous and whatever, it just never works out well.
And normal peaking for performance, you know, and not doing anything outlandish like we just talked about. Yeah, those are accepted changes, you know.
Yeah. Coaching the day of. That's it, y'all.
That's it.
I want to say that's it. Yeah.
I think the theme I think across the board is like coaches. We're here to. I think one of our biggest roles is to help keep you objective.
Yeah.
And from the beginning to the day of, that is a big part of what we do.
Word.
Keep your athlete as cool as the other side of the pillow.
We'll end on that.
Don't
no
put
hot
that
pillows.
On a square.
No hot pillows. Make a square of Bert's head and it says no hot pillows. Okay. See you later.